You missed a major party last week and you didn't even know. And here I'm going to tell you that story. But first, let's talk about what Carnival is, where it comes from, and then my story about in Carnival. Carnival is a medieval tradition celebrated to this day around the world in places like New Orleans, the Caribbean, Rio de Janeiro, the north of Argentina, and Bolivia. I've been a part of some of these celebrations of culture and wanted to share my story today on the podcast about my time in Bolivia. But first, let's explain a little bit of the history. The history of Carnival originated from ancient European festivals such as the Greek Dionysian and the Roman Saturnalia, which were festivals celebrating the Greek and Roman gods. It got transferred to many countries around the world through the Roman Catholic populations. And then it was brought to Brazil by the Portuguese coloners in the 16th and 17th centuries, and as well as the French and Spanish settlers from Europe coming over to the New World, or North and South America and the Caribbean. The term carnival is believed to come from the Latin term of carnum levare, which means to remove meat. That is because it was Christianized by the 40-day period before Easter known as Lent. And so this was before Ash Wednesday, before the fasting of Lent began, where people were not supposed to eat meat before Easter. So somewhat similar to what my Muslim friends right now are celebrating, Ramadan is a way to prepare yourself as an honor and sacrifice to God. Carnival is still celebrated in traditional cultures around the world, as we said before, and with different costumes and music. And that's the beauty of it, is the celebration of the culture in combining, in at least in the case of Bolivia, the indigenous rituals and the Christianized rituals, and just this huge mix of costumes and dances, food, and just celebration of life. And while it is beautiful culture, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of debauchery and drunkenness and other kinds of carnal sins. That is kind of how it started, is the removal of that and the last chance to celebrate, go wild. So there is that. But I want to focus on the story and the culture and my personal story, and also just the really cool things about Bolivia and its culture and the carnival. So the biggest carnival for Bolivia is in Oruro. What that is a celebration of the story of good versus evil, and a celebration to please the Virgin of the mine shaft, and that they call him El Tío, which is the devil that lives in the mine shaft. And in order to please this devil, they um, offer gifts of cigarettes and beer and food and other kind of things, and coca leaves, as a way, because of so much gold and silver and mining that they're taking out of leaving his area, and to dance for the Virgin to make the Virgin of the mine shaft to make her happy. And so there's so many stories of culture, and the costumes are just extravagant, and they explain about the whole history as far as those stories of life is, and even just the cultural significance of the Spaniards coming over and colonizing the people of Bolivia. Even parts of history that some people don't want to talk about, as far as slavery and the Spanish bringing over slaves from Africa, as well as for the mines, as well as being taskmasters of those indigenous people and working them to death with these people that they celebrate now, this kind of history in a way of this show and dancing and the costumes that they use. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those costumes and dances. I put a little sample in here. That was a sample of a very popular song of the dance of the caporales, which is one of my favorite dances. Unfortunately, as far as the history goes, is one of those things where those were the taskmasters of the slaves and the indigenous people that they were forcing to work in the mines, and how they dress is representative of that. They have their hat and their boots with the bells on them and their whip in their hand. And that's how they dance. Actually, they do this very kind of jumping kind of dance. It has a very unique beat that they borrow from the African rhythms to it, which is very kind of ironic. But next, another one that's very interesting to me is the Tinku, which is the another of the indigenous population of Bolivia, and it has a very that was a sample of a Tinku song. What the Tinkus do is in celebration is they actually fight each other in a way to please Pachamama, which is the Mother Earth, with the blood of someone. So basically, they beat someone to death. They have these fights, and that's the way they dress with their. They have a representation of the helmet that the Spaniards wore, that the conquistadores wore, and they have their very colorful traditional dress, and they have this unique dance that's a very hard fighting style looking dance. It's very popular with people that come and see this from Europe and everywhere. There's 400,000 people that'll come and watch the Carnaval in Oruro. And then lastly, one of the ones I wanted to talk about, dance and costume, is the Morenada. Mm. S- s- They have this noise, this shaker, I guess you could say, that makes the rhythm that they dance to, and it's very more of a slow step to it. It's a very elaborate costume as well. They also have some of the costumes, their faces have these big, huge eyes, and that's to represent the greed of the Spaniards. And they have the Spanish beards. They're very over exaggerated to show their faces, and this is the costume that they'll wear. There's lots of other costumes that I didn't really talk about as far as the Saint Michael is one of the main ones, the main angel that dances, and as well as the devil and the seven deadly sins. And then there's also this woman devil called the China Supai, and Supai is the Quechua word for shadow. It has this battle scene go on in part of the dance, which is actually really cool. It's got lots of fireworks and lights and everything going on. There's live bands that are playing the whole time. This goes on for days, and there's actually the Curso de Cursos, which is in Cochabamba, and that is where my story begins. So we were in Cochabamba at the time, visiting family and friends, and they had these things called fraternities, which if you're outside of the U.S., here at college in the U.S., we have these fraternities that we borrowed the term from the Greeks, and it's basically an organization of people that join together, for different social causes or organizations. So basically, it's fraternities for the men, sororities for the women. So here in the U.S., that's different groups of men or different groups of women, and it's similar in the sense of they have these groups for Carnival that they call fraternities, but basically it's just a group of friends that all kind of party together and they, get a, churrasco, like a grill barbecue at their house or something like that. And just basically a big celebration of friends together. And so I was able to go to one of those through friends of my wife and everything, and big pool party and lots of food, and it was a great time. And then from there, after that, there was the Corsa de Corsos, which is at the end of the carnival season. So that party that I mentioned you missed at the very beginning is this Carnival or the Corsa de Corsos. So the Carnival begins in Oruro and then later goes to Cochabamba, which is where we're at. And so all this huge parade is coming down the street for hours and hours. and it has all these different dances that I mentioned. The first, it kind of started with, if I remember correctly, there was the military of Bolivia. They dress up in different costumes. There was this time they were like Toy Story people, and so they all come down with their different costumes, and even they participate, and everybody's watching it, from the sidelines or running around, doing different games and stuff. And that's another thing, side note of Carnival during that season. People throw water balloons or throw buckets of water or spray you with shaving cream or paint and things like that. And that's just part of the carnival. You basically just don't go out in the street during that time if you don't want to get wet. So part of that story is we went up to see a Cristo in Cochabamba, which is a big similar replica of like Rio de Janeiro's Cristo. And we were driving in my father-in-law's truck and came down and we hit like a dead end. And there were some kids on the street that ran at us with a big bucket of water and it splashed all over us. Um, and then later we had some water balloons that we filled up in the truck and we were driving by throwing water balloons at people on the street. I remember there was 2 people walking by, and I was ready to just nail them, and I missed, but I hit the stop sign, and it bang, hit it so loud, scared everybody. It's actually kinda funny, but, it's just part of the fun of the season of, what they call playing with water, playing with carnival, and they do that in different parts of, um, the Caribbean as well. I've experienced kinda parts of that. And so I got to see some of the parades firsthand, take lots of pictures with some of the people, and I'll post that on Instagram here. You can see that some of the pictures of what it was like there. And really, I want to just highlight again that these costumes and these cultures that are, I would say, sometimes shunned because it doesn't blend in with like the proper society is just kind of the beauty of our differences and celebrating our differences. And I just want to encourage you, even if you don't go to Bolivia, just getting outside of your comfort zone and being with some different people, make a friend, just as simple as that. Find someone that's different from you and find something in common. If nothing else, you've got yerba mate. That can always find you a friend there somewhere you can connect with someone. And if not, you got me. Maybe one time we'll get together. And speaking of which, I would love to do a live sometime and do like a Mateada live. I'm trying to schedule one in person. And speaking of which, answering one of the questions from our viewers, there's a town here, Murfreesboro, that has a place called Vito's that sells yerba mate local. And I'm going to try to get a Mateada live there. So if you're listening to me now, thank you for the fan mail. And please, anybody else that has any other questions or wants to send me some fan mail, there's a little link down there. It says send me a text message and I'll read that fan mail. Or you can message me on Instagram. That's cool too. Thank you guys for listening. And I have some more yerba reviews coming up for you very soon.